Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome the founder of Caregiver Chronicles, the podcast, Sarah Stelmach-Brown. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, Lance. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be on your show.
It's our pleasure, our pleasure. So I was researching and reading about your story and the Caregiver Chronicles, and kind of similar to us in a way where our show began during COVID-19. In fact, the show will be 3 years old in May of this year, so just a little over a month away. And you experienced what a lot of families and caregivers experienced, and people in general during COVID, and that was you had caregiver burnout. And you kind of decided you wanted to share your story to help other people. And you had the help of your husband as well. You kind of do this together, and you started Caregiver Chronicles in your truck, which I think is interesting. So tell us the kind of the genesis of when you first had the idea to start Caregiver Chronicles and what it was about the truck that tied into the show that made you record in your truck. I think that's really neat.
Well, it's actually the truck that was kind of the only quiet place we could find.
All right. Sure.
The kids were in bed in the house, or actually I'd had a friend over who was going through a difficult time, and she was like, well, I'll watch the kids so you can go out and record. But I had been going through burnout, and obviously when I was in the midst of my burnout, like when I was in the heavy part of burnout and, just really in a dark place, I wasn't quite in a space to talk about where I was. But as I started the recovery process and saw people feeling the same thing, especially people, my coworkers at the time in healthcare, other autism parents, other people who had elderly grandparents and parents that they were caring for. And while I was trying to do all of those things, it was just my husband. It was just, I don't know, it's hard to explain. It was just like, I need to share this. And every time I would post about something on Facebook, like a story about like, oh, my son, this happened and this is how we addressed it to try to help offer support, I would always have someone say, oh my God, I can't believe we talked about our family in a negative way on social media. That's horrible. It makes you look bad. It makes them look bad. And then I'd have other people come in and say, oh my gosh, I can relate and I don't have anybody to share this with, and I feel so alone. So it kind of came from that. My husband had just started writing the blog What's on Disney Plus, and initially I was like, well, maybe we should do this in blog format. And he kind of stopped me right there, and he's like, well, I'm burnt out too. He's like, and I'm not editing your writing. He's like, you're a great speaker, you're a terrible writer. Which that was just, that's just not my strength. So we decided to do a podcast, and the truck was the quiet place. We didn't have a microphone. We didn't even really have a good computer. So cell phone in a truck.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and before we go on, I just want to quickly plug your husband, because there is a picture behind your right shoulder of him, and I'll let you do it. Why don't you share what he's holding in that picture?
Oh, that is a New England Emmy Award. This past June, he won, his crew. It's not just him. It was a crew, because to make a newscast happen, sure, it takes more than one person. They won Best Morning Newscast Small Market. That was the coolest thing I ever did, was get to go to the Emmys.
Yeah, again, congratulations. I know we've talked about that before, and what an accomplishment, and something that you and the kids must be just so very proud of. So kudos to him. We just wanted to get that out there. And going back to the Caregiver Chronicles, though, I want to touch on something you mentioned. I think it's important for people in a very tasteful, helpful way to see that there are two sides to caregiving. It's not always sunshine, rainbows, and ice cream. There are the dark, stormy, gray clouds on days, but nobody should feel bad about that. They shouldn't feel like they're, insufficient to be a caregiver because of that. That is part of the caregiving journey. There are those good days, but there are going to be some bad days. And hopefully for everybody, the good days outweigh the bad days. But I think it's important to have those conversations and let people know it's safe to have discussions about those types of days.
Absolutely. And I think that there is stigma. There's still stigma with mental health. We're getting better, but we're not there.
Right.
And there's stigma with all kinds of family caregiver issues. There's so much stigma behind it. There's stigma behind physical health. 50 years ago, if you had cancer, you didn't talk about it. If you had a child like my son Joey, they were put in an institution and you were told to forget about them. And I don't believe in that. I believe that health issues are normal. They happen to everybody. Mental health issues are normal. They happen to most of us. We all feel stress. We all feel burnout. We all get anxiety at times. Obviously, like chronic issues need to be addressed, but mental health is so important and we forget. And even when I was growing up, mental health wasn't an issue that kids had. We weren't allowed to be anxious. What do you have to be anxious about? You're a kid. Right. Anxiety doesn't work that way though. It doesn't, you have something to worry about, so it's okay. That's not how anxiety works. And I think it's so important to share it because the more awareness we have of mental health issues and physical health issues and just aware of our community, our surroundings, the better and safer space we make for everybody. Right. And I just think it's important. Better quality of life for everybody.
Absolutely. And, the Caregiver Chronicles, and you've mentioned, your son, it covers autism awareness, but it also covers dementia education, dementia caregiver support. So let's speak to kind of your background now. We mentioned, it started during COVID. You're experiencing this caregiver burnout, but you were a professional healthcare worker, but also with your family, you were also a family caregiver. Kind of explain how those two things blended together, which ultimately led to this burnout.
So I started in healthcare very young. I was a junior in high school. I was 17 years old. And I kind of got told I need to come up with a plan for my life. And I was 17. My plan was to go out Friday night with my friends and do things that 17-year-olds probably shouldn't do in, cornfields or whatever. That was my biggest plan at 16, 17. I didn't really know what I wanted. They had me take an aptitude test and there were a bunch of things that came up. They were like, oh, you'd make a good teacher. I didn't like school. Nurse was one of the things. I didn't really see myself ever as a nurse per se. But I figured my guidance counselor said, there's a CNA class coming up at this nursing home. I think you should take it. Just try. My mom made fun of me and laughed because she's like, you can't shovel dog poop from the yard. How are you gonna clean an elderly person? And I'm like, I'm going to take the class and see. Well, I lasted 17 years in that career field, starting out as a teenager. And, shortly after I'd finished the CNA classes, my grandfather had an accident with a table saw and cut fingers off. And I remember watching the nurse do like the treatment, the visiting nurse do the treatment. And I would help her with getting things set up. And she showed me what to do because she was only allowed so many hours to come in and help him. Family was going to have to help. My grandmother wasn't big on washing her hands. That was just the generation. But I had that understanding. So she's like, well, you're learning to be a CNA. You can learn to do this at home, and I kind of took that role. And as things changed with my grandfather, as he developed dementia, I worked in long-term care facilities as a nurse's aide. I worked in home care and I did both Alzheimer's care and assisted living. And I would recognize things with my grandparents and be there to support them. I lived at home. Even though I worked two jobs, I couldn't quite afford rent with, your salary as a nurse's aide. So I lived at home. I paid my parents rent, worked, helped them with my grandparents when it was needed. Kind of, in that whole time, I didn't only work. I had a life too. I met my husband, had children, all the things. Bought a home. I always helped support my mom in caring for my grandparents, especially like my grandmother when her dementia symptoms started. I would point that out to my mom, like, hey, we need to really watch this, and try to be there and support her. I'd spend weekends with her and stuff. During the pandemic, it was difficult. I was doing that all virtually, like talking to my mom. My mom would say, oh, Meme's doing this now. What do I do? And I would coach her. And I knew she was declining. Unfortunately, my residents in isolation were struggling. And again, with my kids, I was trying to do the distance learning, and very few kids excelled at distance learning. It
Very
just,
difficult.
so I watched them decline.
I was
But
just going to say, even the teachers had difficulty doing it. It's very hard. Yeah.
Exactly. And it was just like, it all did blend together, and I got to use a lot of the experience that I learned in home care and in nursing homes in caring for my children. I know when I take my son to the doctor and he gets on an antibiotic, I know he needs a probiotic with it, like yogurt. I automatically know these things. I know certain things to look for with certain illnesses. I I know how to do his physical care as far as like diaper changes and things like that people who don't have that experience, they don't have.
Right. Yeah. So, Sarah, as you're, progressing through your professional career as a CNA, which, we feel like CNAs and home health aides and caregivers everybody plays such a crucial role, but I don't think people realize what an important role that this support staff, like the CNAs and home health aides, play. They're the ones spending the most time with their patients, their clients, their residents. And, it's a very demanding job. You might have 12, 16 patients or residents that you have to tend to, but there's only one of you, So as you're doing this, and, and maybe you worked a 12-hour shift, 8-hour shift, whatever the length of your shift was, then you're going home at some point, and now you're the family caregiver, and anybody that has a job, whatever days of the week they work, Monday through Friday or weekends, when you get done with work, you want to go home and unwind and kind of debrief from that, day of work. What was that like for you going from that role as the professional caregiver? Now you're going home as the wife, the mother, and now also the family caregiver.
Well, I hate to say this, but pre-pandemic it wasn't as bad because the environment at work felt different and it didn't feel so heavy and it wasn't scary. I wasn't terrified. I
Mm.
mean, we had stomach bugs blow through the building and they'd go through my house, or I'd have a stomach bug in my house and try my best not to bring it to work. But now I'm concerned, am I going to bring this virus that is killing senior citizens to work from one of my kids? Or am I going to bring this home and my husband end up in a hospital, or myself or my kids? So it changed. It used to be my half-hour ride to and from work was my decompress time. And I would play my heavy metal music or whatever I wanted as loud as I could, some Slipknot, Rage Against the Machine on the way into work to kind of like, and on the way home to just kind of like let it all out. Unfortunately, the pandemic, it just changed it. It also changed like breaks and vacation time. You couldn't really take time off. You got 4 days. You couldn't, because where could you go, and there were staffing shortages and everything. So, and even when I did have a break from everything, it wasn't much. My parents would help and babysit occasionally. I'd trade off babysitting. Now, I hate to say the word babysitting, but I would trade off caregiving for my grandmother and the kids, and then they would take my grandmother and
Sure.
the kids the next week, which is just complete and utter chaos, but fun. Um, it was just really hard, and it contributed significantly to my burnout and my mental health just declining the way it did. And, moving on, it got to a point where I decided that I just can't juggle those roles personally and professionally anymore.
So, and if you don't mind sharing for viewers and listeners who may be listening or watching and saying, she's telling my story, or they're questioning whether they're experiencing burnout or if it's just normal, compassion fatigue or just exhaustion. What what did your caregiver burnout look like, and what was the recovery like, and how long did it take?
Okay, so this is gonna get a little dark. I didn't even realize I was burnt out till I was screaming in the living room that I wanted to die.
Mm.
And um I was hyperventilating, crying, and I had to go outside on my back porch and try to breathe. And I couldn't breathe. Like I could not breathe. I was hyperventilating and I couldn't even call a crisis line. I had to use a text line. And I I strongly recommend if you're feeling that way, you can text 988.
We're going to put that up on the screen too for our viewers. Yeah.
Please do that. 988 is, the hotline if you're feeling that way. And I couldn't even call a family member at that point or a friend. I couldn't, I felt so lost and so hopeless. Like I felt like my caregiver journey was never going to end. Nothing was going to get better. It was just like such a dark place. My recovery looked like that. It looked like sitting on the porch for hours contemplating whether or not I wanted to continue living and hyperventilating. And I'm glad I reached out for help because obviously, like, life goes on. Life is not terrible all the time. You have those dark moments, but you can definitely get out of it. And for any caregiver, obviously, if you're a family caregiver, you're needed. And being needed was enough for me to make the decision to stay here. I'd also lost a close family friend that way and really remembered that pain and was like, I can't do that. I can't do that again to the people I love. So those were kind of my motivation. And even if you don't know in that moment, that hotline will help you find it. I 988, please, if you're ever feeling that way, please, please, please. There is help, there is hope. And
Absolutely.
then it was me telling my son's counselor, like, hey, this happened the other day. I need to talk to you again because I had stopped my counseling so I could make sure I was taking care of my kids at that time. I put all my needs aside. And she's like, this was a Friday appointment, a virtual appointment with my son Friday. And I just said, hey, I need 5 minutes of your time. She's like, I'll see you Monday morning at 10. She's like, find a quiet place. I'll see you Monday morning at 10. We got to talk. And I had support groups and things like that. But again, all of that stopped during COVID. So I was reminded to reach out to my support group leader. And when family heard this story, like when I finally felt okay enough to talk to my family about, I just went through this like episode, this is what happened. They were like, why didn't you call me? And I'm like, because I couldn't. I just couldn't at that time. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't know who to talk to. And there is that like shame and stigma with mental health. And I'm fortunate that I have a lot of people. I have a lot of family. I have a big family, a big loving family, a lot of people that care about me. And I care about a lot of people. And again, it took forever to recover from. I don't know that I'm fully recovered from burnout. I don't think I ever will fully recover
Okay.
from burnout. I think it's always going to be a reoccurring theme in my life that I have to work on.
Aside from stepping away from the professional side of your caregiving, because you're still caregiving for your family, are there other things aside from the therapy that you have found that has been helpful?
Yes, many things. And I'm gonna say that I tried almost all of the things. I tried all the natural things like Reiki and sound healing and journaling and meditation and prayer and crystals and medications and I can list all the things I've tried. I've tried all the non-natural and all the natural things. The the biggest thing that works for me is making sure that I find moments in every day for self-care.
Mhm.
That self-care is not and I have to remind myself that self-care is not a luxury. It's necessary. And self-care, I like there's stigma around it that it's selfish. There's some stigma around it that it's only for rich people or whatever. I'm not a rich person. I'll be like blunt about that. We're far from that. And self-care for me is not getting my nails done or going to a salon. It's really simple things like playing my favorite song and a dance party, burning an incense are really cheap, you can get them at the dollar store,
Mhm.
and just sitting and just trying to take breaths. And if you're not into meditation, that's okay. Taking a walk. Sometimes self-care for me, all those other self-care things feel like too much, and all I want to do is watch a movie or play The Sims or have a glass of wine. Self-care can be any of those things. Wine, I strongly recommend, or alcohol, in very much moderation, because it can actually be a depressant and can make depression worse.
Right.
Um, but one glass probably won't occasionally, you know.
So as you're on this journey for your self-care and, trying to remedy the burnout that you just had traumatically experienced, what was the defining moment where you said, well, now I want to start a podcast?
It was it was a couple months after that. So that happened in like May, and it was a couple months later, and I was reading one of my husband's articles for What's on Disney Plus, and I was like, I just want to share our story.
Mm.
Like, and he was the one who suggested we podcast
Okay.
instead of a blog. And we kind of talked about it back and forth. And I said, you know what, let's do it. I had a friend over. She was kind of going through some things. She was going through divorce, needed a place to crash for a couple nights. So we'd already worked together. I figured at this point she could stay. She'd be safe in our little bubble. We were working in the same building.
Okay.
So you know what I mean? Like it was like if something happens in the building at this point, and she's, we're both, which funny, ironically, when it did happen, we both got sick at the same time.
Oh, wow.
Um, and but she was staying with us for a little while, a couple nights, and she just helped us out with the kids, and we did it. And I remember when I went into work and I played the first like beginning of the episode, my coworkers were laughing. They're like, oh my god, you sound so professional. And I just became very passionate about not just sharing my story, but sharing other stories and trying to help family caregivers.
Would you call Caregiver Chronicles part of self-care for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A
By
thousand
helping others?
percent.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. How have you found, or do you have any stories that you want to share that Caregiver Chronicles has helped other family caregivers?
The most personal one is my mom. I had my mom on to talk about her caregiving journey with my grandmother with dementia. And my mom was reluctant. She was one of the people who's like, we don't talk about that. And I was like, when she did, and she felt so much better after. And I was like, I told you so. And there have been episodes where I have learned, because I learned from my guests, because I don't know everything, you
No.
know,
Yeah.
and I learned from my guests, and I learned to relook at how I look at self-care from my guests. I have learned methods of self-care that I didn't even think were self-care
Right.
from my guests. Um, I've learned things about my children because I've interviewed autistic adults who have explained to me, like, when I was your son's age, I was nonverbal. Now I am. Um, I've just learned so much, and I love learning. I'm kind of a nerd. I love documentaries, learning, and it's been a journey. It's been therapeutic, and I get excited about my guests, and I light up talking about it. It's been a passion.
That's wonderful. So now that you have Caregiver Chronicles, you're still a family caregiver. Do you foresee, or do you ever look forward? And I don't mean forward in the sense like anticipating, but into the future to where you see where your family caregiver role may end at some point?
My family caregiver role is probably going to end with my death. My son is always going to need care. He's never going to not need care. So I'm either going to have to be in a position where I cannot take care of him mentally and physically anymore, or dead. And I know that that sounds dark, but it's the truth for family caregivers who are parents with a child with some kind of, whether it's a physical need or a cognitive special need or a developmental disability. My role is not going to end. It's hopefully my other son is going to be able to help advocate and take care of his brother. That's a huge burden to put on a kid. Hopefully his cousins, my niece and nephew, they're young right now, but hopefully when they get older, they can help advocate too, because if he has a team of people supporting his brother, then good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And so you mentioned your one son with autism. How do you let's go back to that cornfield when you were 17, right? The Sarah that was there, aside from the normal stuff as we age and mature, how has being a mother to two children on the autism spectrum changed you as a person, or changed what you viewed yourself as going back in that cornfield?
A lot. It's changed me a lot. I was very narrow in my views
Hmm.
of what adult life should look like. And I want to say I was a little bit old fashioned, and I don't want to like be like political. I'm trying not to be like too political, but I was a little bit more traditional in my views of like, you grow up, you do this, you do that, and I don't know. I became a mom and realized that not a single expectation that I had of being a mom, my life turned out to be the way it was.
Okay.
I was the person who looked at parents with screaming kids and was like, oh my God, they must not be great parents. I was the person who looked at parents who had kids on like harnesses and leashes and stuff, thinking, what a terrible parent they must be. They can't pay attention to their kid. Well, my kid is on a harness and a leash because all I have to do is sneeze and he's gone. And now I realize, like, oh my God, who the hell did I think I was to judge other families for that? I guess I've become a more compassionate and more empathetic person. I've realized the struggle. I've realized the invisible people. I notice and I hate saying invisible, but we know what I mean when I say that. I notice the people that a lot of people just look away from. The
Sure.
people in the wheelchair, the kid with the disability, the adult with the disability who's sitting at the table that everybody just walks by and doesn't say hi to because they don't know how.
Right.
Um, I was shopping with my dad a few weeks ago. There was a mom. She had her son. Her son was taller than her. He was probably 20 something years old. And she was in the bathroom helping her son in the bathroom. And her son had a couple words, but not a lot. And she's like, okay, we got to wash our hands now. And I introduced myself. I said, hi, my name's Sarah. I have a son that's on the autism spectrum. He's 7, he's nonverbal. And I said, I think you're doing a fantastic job. I saw 2 other women look at this mom with her adult son in the bathroom, which where else is she going to take him? She
Right.
can't go in the men's room looking like, oh my God, why is he in here? And I'm just like, you're further along on your journey than I am. And thank you for what you're doing. I'm glad to see you guys out and about. It's nice, nice to meet you guys. Good luck. Have a good day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you get much inquiries from families who might be, raising children with autism, asking for advice, or just relating to stories that you've shared? Any that stand out to you?
Yes, I do. I get a lot. I want to say I get more of the we get it. We understand. I have a nephew or a cousin or a son or whatever. I do get more of that than I get the negative remarks,
Hmm.
which I'm grateful for. Uh, I try to offer advice I can, but I also know that every child is different and every family is different. Just being on the autism spectrum, there's so
Sure.
many differences, and I can give tips for things that work or help my family. If they take it, they take it, and if it doesn't work for them, then that's okay too.
One of the biggest things that I have read and heard about when you are raising a child with autism, and again, this is not from personal experience, just what I've gathered over the years, is there's different, I don't know if ideology is the right word, or there's just some people have different concepts of what and how they should, go with treatment and care for a loved one. Does that play into any of the discussions you have with families?
I try not to tell people what, well, yes and no. I got an email from somebody saying that they had a recovery. Their son recovered from autism. And that made me cringe because you can't recover from a chronic condition. You always have it. It's always, you can't just not be autistic anymore. You can't just be autistic and then wake up after taking a vitamin and not be autistic anymore. That really bothers me because I know it's complete and utter nonsense. But as far as like if a family chooses to have ABA services versus, do PTOT, that's their decision. They need to make that decision for themselves.
Right.
If a family decides a GPS tracker is right for them, or a family decides that I don't need to do that, that's fine. If there's again, it depends on the family. Some moms have kids like my sons and they still work full time.
Right.
That's awesome. That's amazing that they can do that. Some moms gave up work on their journey way earlier than I have. And that's okay too. Some moms advocate and do the advocacy stuff, and other moms would rather ask another mom to come and help them advocate with them.
Hmm.
That's okay.
So it's really, is it fair to say it's really just comes down to what works best for that family?
Yeah, it's personality based.
Right.
Not every mom is going to feel comfortable sitting in a IEP meeting telling the school they have to do this for their child, or next time they're coming in with a lawyer. Some moms need someone to sit there and do that with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
I've become that mom. Go me. But it's just it's personality. It's your personality, your spouse's personality, your children's personality, your all the things. There's a lot.
Um, Now your husband, we mentioned him at the beginning. How did he factor and play into this, and how did it affect your marriage?
Well, first and foremost, he is probably the best father in the world. I will say that if there were an Emmy for being a father, he would have them all. He is he's a better dad than I am mom sometimes. A lot of times. He was right there. He jumped right in. He listened when the therapists were in our house doing the evaluations. He listened when I said, "Hey, I think something's wrong." He said, I get it. Let's go. Let's do the doctor's appointments. And he learned everything he could about autism. He's now writing for Autism Parenting Magazine, and is doing some work with them as well as at the news station and everything else that he does. So he's been wholeheartedly into this. Him and I both were up nights researching articles and trying to support. And when I left my job, he supported me to stay home. He saw where I was. He saw that I was getting physical infections and stuff. And he just right there and he supported me. When I had my mental health crisis, he supported me. When our kids had their whatever episode it was, or when my son had his mental health crisis, my husband was right there for support.
Yeah.
He's
Did
amazing.
did he because I can, only imagine but not truly understand what it must be like for the two of you going through what you guys went through. Did he deal with any effects of any sort of burnout, fatigue, or issues, and how did he handle it?
He has well, he works in media, and he's a local news producer, and the news hasn't been good for a long time.
Sure.
It's been hard. He has also been in counseling a little bit. But his really big outlet is his creativity outlets,
Yeah.
like writing for what's on Disney Plus, writing for Phantom Sports. Those are his big outlets. So
Right. Is that his self-care, his method of self-care?
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. He would 100% agree with that. He does these little on his social media, he does these little like Disney brackets. He's a big
Oh,
sports guy, and
okay.
he'll put different Disney shows up against each other, and people will comment, and he just gets like so excited when people comment on those, and sometimes he'll get different perspectives, and he just loves it.
That's fun. That's fun. It sounds like you guys just have a tremendous support system and family. I want to kind of end with a couple of last questions here, Sarah. And thank you again for your time and all the tremendous work you're doing at Caregiver Chronicles, and for, being able to share your story. I can't imagine that that's always the easiest thing to do. But I just hope a lot of other people will benefit from the work you're doing by sharing it. If we talked in 5 years, where do you envision Caregiver Chronicles being?
I don't know. I hope, honestly, I'd love to be at your level. Um, I think that's everybody's goal though, right? I think I've gotten, I don't know. I hope it's still around. I think it will be. Um, I know that my audience is ever growing. Family caregivers, this is not going anywhere,
Not going. Right.
I know that. And I would like to be I I would love to have a book published. I would love to be doing speaking events, public speaking events, and just be a person who can, like other family caregiver influencers, I guess is kind of the term, be somebody who is a role model in a way, looked at as a mental health advocate, a role model, just all those things for family caregivers. And, when families hear my podcast, to find comfort in it.
Yeah.
That's probably my biggest goal, I think, for 5 years.
Wonderful. And do you envision, and we kind of just touched on it, but do you envision there becoming more support for family caregivers aside from, podcasts and YouTube shows like yours or ours, where, the healthcare system is going to start getting more involved in the sense of providing more resources for the caregivers? They're already taking care of the patients to an extent, but then in a way, almost as an extension, taking care of the caregiver. Because, one of the most common themes I see in my, my day-to-day job when we meet with these families is, they're getting a diagnosis for dementia. And that's really all they're getting. It's a diagnosis. They're not, telling the caregiver or the family, here's some resources, here's what you need to look out for, or even giving more insight into, what can we do if mom decides to wander all night around the house? How do we help contain her from leaving the home, or, helping her to get a better restful night's sleep, things like that.
I think that there's like crumbling factions in the healthcare system right now, that it's not in the best shape,
Right.
like the healthcare system in general in a lot of places. Think we need to fix the foundation of it. It's kind of like it's the foundation of healthcare has to be fixed, right? Like we know it's not in its best form. And I think once we get it fixed where we can give the best care for the patient all around, then I think we can branch to the family and caregivers. I hate that we're not there yet. We should have always been there. Like it should just always exist, but it doesn't. Same thing with my son when he got diagnosed with autism, and there's so much misinformation on the internet with
Right.
any medical condition. I don't care what medical condition it is. There's so much misinformation out there. And sometimes the misinformation is easier to find than the real information. And I think that there definitely needs to be like sites and things like that where real information is put forth and real advice. I think that it's important to get family caregiving advice from actual family caregivers or former family caregivers, because someone who's never lived it doesn't they don't you don't if you haven't lived that life, if you haven't cared for somebody, you don't know what it's like to care for somebody in your home. Even when I was working in healthcare, I didn't get it until I had to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And sometimes it's worse to Google a symptom or a condition because, like you said, there's bad information and you could actually, stress yourself out, depress yourself, and it may not even be the accurate answer that you really need. I always say seek professional medical advice and call your doctor. Don't trust what you read on the internet. So great advice, Sarah. And I just want to thank you again and all the work that you guys are doing at Caregiver Chronicles. And we will have the links posted for how people can reach out to you and follow you in the Caregiver Chronicles podcast. And hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lance. I really appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. And thank you too, Sarah. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming networks or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Sarah Stelmach-Brown, the founder of the podcast Caregiver Chronicles. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.